I ran from my wedding straight into the car of the most dangerous man in the city, Weston Hayes, head of the Hayes crime syndicate, and my fiancé's deadliest rival. When he discovered me hours later, covered in mud and desperation, he gave me two choices: return to Trent Pierce's cage, or become his weapon in a war I didn't know I'd started. I chose survival, and it cost me everything I thought I knew about freedom. The silk of the wedding dress, a scandalous white banner of my impending doom, was heavy and cold, plastered to my legs by the deluge. It was saturated with the dark, clinging mud of the Pierce estate grounds. Every muscle in my body burned, not from the physical strain of running, but from the raw, desperate fear that was a knot tightening in my chest cavity. I wasn't running from a broken heart. I was running from a lifetime of being owned. At 26, I was Anya Thorne, a structural architect whose practical education had done nothing to prepare me for the grim reality of being a bargaining chip. I was an orphan raised by a rotation of indifferent state guardians, and finally left to the mercy of a distant, indebted relative who saw fit to auction me off to the highest bidder. Trent Pierce, a man whose ambition was only outmatched by his cruelty. There was no family to mourn my disappearance or to use as collateral. A small, cold comfort that meant I alone bore the consequences of this desperate flight. The mansion lights visible between the gaps in the tall, manicured hedges were searchlights in the gloom, and I could hear the muffled, angry shouts of the security detail. They were closing in. I veered sharply, my momentum carrying me around the corner of the maintenance shed. And that was when I saw it. It was not a supplier's van or a florist's truck. It was a car. A massive obsidian black stretch limousine idling with an almost predatory patience near the service gate, waiting like a silent, well-fed beast. The polished metal reflected the frantic slashes of lightning, gleaming dangerously. Hesitation was a luxury I could not afford. I needed a hole to disappear into, and this black void was the only one offered. My hand found the handle of the passenger door. It clicked open without protest, a quiet, inviting sound that seemed entirely too easy. I threw myself across the plush leather seats and onto the floor well, pulling the heavy door shut. The soft, authoritative thud was the sound of a temporary reprieve, cutting the roar of the downpour down to a gentle, insistent drumming overhead. I curled into the shadows, the white satin of my dress now merging with the blackness, utterly ruined. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of high-grade leather, aged wood, and a sharp, clean, expensive cologne that somehow cut through the dampness clinging to my skin. I focused on the scent, on the texture of the thick carpet against my bruised knees, trying to anchor myself in the present moment, rather than dissolving into the sheer terror of what awaited me if I was found. A minute passed, maybe two. Then the realization hit me. The engine had engaged. We were moving. Relief, sharp and intoxicating, flooded my system. Someone was driving this beast. Someone was taking me away from the Pierce property. I began to mentally plot my next move, planning to wait for the first stoplight or traffic jam, open the door, and run again. But then the distinct, measured sound of metal on glass echoed through the silent space. I froze, breath suspended in my throat. The tinted glass partition, the one separating the passenger compartment from the driver, slowly, smoothly lowered. My heart didn't just pound. It stopped. A dead weight in my chest. But what he discovered next changed everything. I had been so focused on the empty front seat and the anonymity of the car, I hadn't considered the possibility of a passenger already being there. The sudden influx of light from the street lamps we were passing, combined with the faint glow from the car's interior controls, illuminated the figure seated on the forward-facing seat. If you've ever felt trapped, been forced into a corner with no way out, or made a desperate choice that changed everything, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and comment where you're watching from. We're building a family of people who refuse to be owned anymore. He was massive, not bulky, but powerfully built. His tailored suit, dark charcoal, the fabric so smooth it barely creased, spoke volumes of wealth and lethal precision. He held a crystal glass in one hand, swirling the amber contents slowly, deliberately. The sight was unnervingly calm, a tableau of absolute control amidst my chaos. My eyes scanned his face, the strong jawline, the sculpted cheekbones. He was devastatingly attractive, the kind of beauty that felt dangerous, like staring directly at a lightning strike. His skin was pale and smooth, and his dark hair was meticulously styled, perfectly in place despite the chaos of the storm outside. Tattoos crept up from his collar and decorated his knuckles. Intricate, deliberate marks of a life lived outside the law. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes met mine. They were dark, penetrating, and utterly devoid of warmth, like obsidian carved into human form, reflecting nothing but cold, calculated assessment. He was Weston Hayes. I knew him from the whispered rumors among the architectural community and the business world. The man whose legitimate construction empire was as notorious as his shadowed criminal organization, the undisputed head of the Hayes Syndicate, and a sworn rival of the Pierce family. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. His gaze drifted down to the stained fabric of my wedding dress currently pooling on his expensive floor mat. "You stained my carpet," he stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried the weight of absolute authority. It wasn't a question or a threat. It was a simple, damning observation of an undeniable truth. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. Terror, cold and rational, replaced blind panic. I was no longer a runaway. I was a trespasser in a moving armored cage owned by a man far more dangerous than the one I had just fled. I pushed myself up slowly, bracing one hand against the leather seat, forcing myself to meet his unwavering gaze. Years of architectural school, of presentations to hostile city councils, kicked in. I had to use logic, not hysterics. "I won't beg," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rapid, frantic pulsing in my throat. "And I won't waste your time asking why you care. You don't. But I know things you need to know. Things that can be used against Trent Pierce." The limo didn't stop. Not at the estate gates. Not at the first intersection where I'd planned my escape. Not anywhere within the territory I knew. The engine purred with mechanical indifference as the city lights outside the tinted windows shifted from the sprawling Pierce estate to dense urban corridors, then to the sparse industrial outskirts where street lamps became scarce and the darkness between them grew longer. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. I stayed frozen on the floor my body cramped into the smallest possible configuration. The ruined wedding dress wrapped around me like a burial shroud. The carpet beneath my cheek smelled of expensive wool and faint traces of gun oil, a scent I recognized from my brief mandatory tour of Trent's private security office. Every muscle in my body screamed for movement, but I didn't dare shift. The man in the forward-facing seat hadn't spoken again after his damning observation about the carpet. He simply sat there, swirling his drink with maddeningly calm precision, occasionally glancing at his phone with the detached interest of someone reviewing stock portfolios rather than dealing with a desperate woman bleeding mud onto his custom interior. An hour passed, maybe more. The quality of the road changed beneath us. Smooth asphalt gave way to something rougher, older. I heard the crunch of gravel. Then the hiss of hydraulics as the partition between compartments sealed shut again, cutting off even the faint glow of the dashboard lights. We were somewhere remote, somewhere deliberate. Something didn't add up, and the truth was darker than he expected. The limo finally stopped. The engine cut. Silence rushed in to fill the void, thick and suffocating. I heard the driver's door open and close with professional efficiency, Then footsteps on gravel, measured, unhurried. The passenger door beside me opened without warning, and cold night air flooded the compartment, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant rain. Out! Weston Hayes' voice came from above me, that same low baritone, but stripped of the almost conversational tone he'd used earlier. This was a command, not a request, not a suggestion. I didn't move immediately. My body had locked into survival mode, every instinct screaming conflicting orders. Run, hide, comply, fight. But there was nowhere to run to. I was miles from anything resembling civilization, trapped in the presence of a man whose reputation was built on the systematic elimination of problems. I don't repeat myself. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The quiet certainty in those 4 words carried more weight than any threat. I forced my limbs to cooperate, pushing myself up from the floor well with shaking arms. The white satin of my dress caught on the doorframe as I maneuvered out of the car, tearing further with a sound like ripping paper. I stumbled onto the gravel, my bare feet. I'd lost my heels somewhere during the initial sprint, finding sharp stones and cold earth, say. The night air bit through the wet fabric clinging to my skin. That moment, everything in the room changed. We were in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. No lights, no roads visible beyond the narrow gravel drive we'd arrived on. A structure loomed behind Weston. A house, maybe, or a warehouse. It was difficult to tell in the darkness. The only illumination came from the limo's interior lights and a single fixture mounted above what looked like a reinforced steel door. Weston stood between me and the vehicle, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed in a way that somehow made him more threatening. Up close, fully illuminated by the harsh overhead light, he was even more imposing than he'd appeared in the car. Tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of build that came from functional strength rather than vanity. The tattoos I'd glimpsed earlier covered more of him than I'd realized. Intricate geometric patterns wound up his neck, disappeared beneath his collar, and marked every visible inch of his hands. They weren't decorative. They were declarations. His dark eyes tracked over me with clinical assessment, cataloging damage, calculating value. When his gaze finally settled on my face, I forced myself to hold it, to not look away, to not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. You have exactly 60 seconds to convince me why I shouldn't drive you back to the Pierce estate and leave you at the gate with a bow tied around your neck, he said, checking his watch with deliberate slowness. Starting now. His next decision would decide whether he lived or died. My mind raced. 60 seconds. Trent had spent weeks preparing me for our marriage, drilling me on social graces, proper behavior, the performance of gratitude for being elevated from orphan to Mrs. Pierce. But he'd made a critical error. He'd shown me things, blueprints, contracts, financial records he'd left carelessly open on his desk while he took phone calls in the next room, confident I was too intimidated or too stupid to understand what I was seeing. Trent Pierce is leveraging undocumented construction codes to build on protected wetlands, I said, the words tumbling out fast but controlled. He's bribing city inspectors to approve structural permits for a commercial development that violates federal environmental statutes. The project breaks ground in 3 weeks. And he's already sold pre-construction contracts to 5 major corporations under fraudulent compliance documentation. Weston's expression didn't change. 40 seconds. He's doing it on land that borders your construction sites on the northern corridor, I continued, forcing my voice to steady. The wetland violations will trigger federal investigations that won't stop at his property line. Your projects will be caught in the sweep. Your permits will be frozen. Your timelines will collapse. He's setting you up to take collateral damage while he profits from the chaos. 30 seconds. Weston pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped something, then held it out to me. On the screen was a satellite image of a construction site I recognized from Trent's files. Show me. There was one detail everyone missed. My hands shook as I took the phone, but my fingers were steady as I zoomed in on the exact coordinates, traced the property boundaries, highlighted the wetland buffer zones Trent was violating. Years of architectural training made the analysis automatic. I could see the structural fraud in the topography itself. "Here," I said, pointing to a section of disturbed earth. "He's already started illegal grading. And here, this is where he'll claim the detention pond satisfies environmental mitigation. But the drainage calculations are falsified. The runoff will flood directly into your adjacent sites during the first major storm." Weston took the phone back, studied the screen for a long moment, then looked at me. "You memorized this." "I'm an architect," I said. "I see structures. I remember them." "You're also a liability." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Trent Pierce doesn't lose assets without retaliation. He'll come for you. And when he does, anyone harboring you becomes a target." "I'm aware." My voice came out colder than I'd intended. "But I'm also the only person who can testify to what he's planning. I reviewed the documents, I know the timeline, and I know where he's hidden the original contracts." But there was one thing he didn't know about his closest ally. Weston's eyes narrowed fractionally, the first crack in his absolute control. "Where?" "That," I said, meeting his gaze with every ounce of defiance I could summon, "is information I'll trade for protection, not give away for free." For 5 long seconds, he said nothing. Then, without warning, he smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't reassuring. It was the smile of a predator recognizing worthy prey. "Get inside," he said, turning toward the steel door. "We're going to have a much longer conversation." In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. The interior of the structure was nothing like I'd expected. Not a warehouse, not a safe house. It was a residence. Sparse, brutally modern, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the far wall revealed nothing but darkness and the faint silhouettes of trees. The furniture was leather and steel, the kind of design that prioritized function and intimidation over comfort. Everything in the space seemed designed to remind visitors that this was enemy territory. Weston moved through the room with the ease of absolute ownership, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a chair with careless precision. Without the structured armor of the jacket, the full extent of his build was visible. Broad shoulders, a tapered waist, every movement controlled and deliberate. He crossed to a bar built into the wall, poured 2 fingers of something amber into a fresh glass, then turned to face me. "Sit." He gestured to the low-slung leather sofa with his glass. I didn't move. My feet were bleeding, leaving small marks on his polished concrete floor. My dress was destroyed. I was shaking from cold and adrenaline and the sudden, overwhelming awareness that I'd traded one cage for another. "I'd rather stand." That wasn't a request. His tone didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. A subtle squaring of his shoulders. A fractional tilt of his head that made the room feel smaller. "You're in my home, on my property, under my rules. If I tell you to sit, you sit." For the first time, he wasn't in control. Every instinct I had screamed to refuse, to push back, to assert some fragment of autonomy. But I wasn't stupid. This man held all the power in this equation, and antagonizing him would accomplish nothing except my own destruction. I moved to the sofa and sat, perching on the edge, my spine rigid. Weston took a slow drink, watching me over the rim of his glass with those unreadable dark eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, setting the glass down on the side table with a soft click. "I'm going to give you 2 options. You're going to choose one. There will be no negotiation, no bargaining, no room for adjustment." He moved closer, looming over me, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. The height difference, The sheer physical dominance of his presence was a calculated tactic. He wanted me to feel small, powerless, dependent. Option 1, he said. I drive you back to the Pierce estate right now. You walk up to that door, you apologize to Trent for your theatrics, and you marry him tomorrow as planned. I'll even provide an alibi for where you've been. A confused bride who got cold feet and needed a drive to clear her head. Trent gets his architect wife. You get to live in his gilded cage. And I forget you ever existed. The thought of returning to Trent made bile rise in my throat. I could see it so clearly. His hand on my arm, too tight, always too tight. The smile he wore for guests that never reached his eyes. The casual cruelty disguised as concern. The ownership. Option 2, Weston continued, and his voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You stay here. Under my protection. Under my control. You provide me with every piece of information you have about Trent's operations, his plans, his weaknesses. You testify when I need you to testify. You appear where I need you to appear. And in exchange, I guarantee Trent Pierce will never touch you again. He knew something that no one else in the building did. That's not protection, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's just a different kind of ownership. Yes, Weston agreed without hesitation. It is. But here's the difference. I don't pretend otherwise. Trent would dress it up in flowers and wedding vows and promises of partnership while he ground you into dust. I'm telling you exactly what this is. A transaction. Your freedom from him in exchange for your compliance with me. And if I refuse both options? His smile was cold. Then you walk out that door right now, with no resources, no money, no identification, no allies, and you see how long you last before either Trent's people find you, or you freeze to death in the woods. I'd estimate 72 hours. Generously. He wasn't bluffing. I could see it in the absolute certainty of his posture, the way he'd already dismissed the possibility as irrelevant. This was a man who dealt in probabilities and outcomes, not emotions or mercy. And suddenly he realized he was being played. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why offer protection at all? You could just extract the information and dump me back at Trent's door. Weston's expression shifted, not softening, but sharpening into something more focused. Because Trent Pierce has been encroaching on my territory for 18 months. He's stolen contracts, bribed my suppliers, and made 3 separate attempts to undermine my construction projects. He thinks he's untouchable because of his family name and his political connections. He leaned down, bracing one hand on the arm of the sofa beside me, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath and the clean, expensive scent of his cologne. You, Anya Thorne, are the structural weakness in his foundation, and I'm very good at exploiting weaknesses. So I'm a weapon. Yes. He didn't sugarcoat it. But you're a weapon that gets to choose which side of the war you're on. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the tattoos that marked him as someone who'd earned his power through violence and strategy. At the expensive watch that showed he'd turned that violence into empire. At the dark, calculating eyes that saw people as assets or obstacles. He was everything my practical, logical mind told me to fear. But he was also the only option that didn't end with me back in Trent's possession. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. If I agree to option 2, I said carefully, what exactly does compliance mean? It means you live where I tell you to live. You go where I tell you to go. You speak to who I allow you to speak to. He straightened, crossing his arms. It means your architectural skills belong to me. Your knowledge belongs to me. Your testimony belongs to me. In exchange, you get protection, resources, and the guarantee that Trent Pierce's claim on you is permanently severed. And if I want to leave, then you ask permission. If I grant it, you leave. If I don't, You stay. His expression was utterly uncompromising. I'm not offering you freedom, Anya. I'm offering you survival. The terms are non-negotiable. My hands clenched in the ruined fabric of my dress. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane, that trading one controlling man for another solved nothing, that I should refuse, walk out, take my chances in the world rather than submit to another cage. But the rational part of my brain hadn't kept me alive during 3 years of foster care. It hadn't gotten me through architecture school on scholarships and spite. It hadn't taught me that sometimes survival meant choosing the lesser evil and waiting for the opportunity to turn it into an advantage. I need something in writing, I said. A contract, clear terms, defined boundaries. Weston's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. Smart, but no. Contracts can be subpoenaed. Lawyers can be bribed. You'll have my word, and my word is worth more than any legal document in this city. Your word that you'll protect me from Trent. Yes, and that you won't. I couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too vast, too terrifying. But this wasn't even the most shocking part. Hurt you? He finished it for me. Use you? Discard you when you're no longer useful? He tilted his head, considering. I won't make promises I can't guarantee, but I will tell you this. I don't damage my assets. And as long as you're valuable to me, you're untouchable to everyone else. It wasn't reassurance. It wasn't comfort. But it was honest. Option 2, I said, the words tasting like ash. I choose option 2. Weston nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. Then we have an agreement. He pulled his phone from his pocket, typed something quickly, then looked back at me. First rule, you don't leave this property without my explicit permission. Second rule, you provide complete transparency about everything you know regarding Trent's operations. Third rule, you follow my instructions without question or delay. And in return, you're under the protection of the Hayes organization as of this moment. Trent Pierce no longer has any claim on you, legal, social, or otherwise. He held out his hand. Do we have an understanding? I looked at his extended hand, broad palm, tattooed knuckles, the physical manifestation of the deal I was making. Then I reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, warm, absolutely controlled. We have an understanding, I said. Good. He released my hand and stepped back. There's a bedroom upstairs, second door on the right. You'll find clothes in the closet and a bathroom attached. Get cleaned up. We start work in the morning. He turned away, dismissing me as if the conversation was already forgotten, and I stood on shaking legs. My feet left small, bloody prints on the concrete as I moved toward the stairs, but I didn't look back. Looking back would mean acknowledging what I'd just done. What I'd just agreed to. I'd escaped Trent Pierce's cage. I'd just walked willingly into Weston Hayes's. What followed next was completely unexpected. The bedroom was exactly what I should have expected. Functional, expensive, impersonal. A king-sized bed with crisp white linens. A closet filled with women's clothing in various sizes, all still tagged, as if Weston kept a rotating inventory of guest necessities. The attached bathroom was all marble and chrome, with a shower large enough for 3 people and water pressure that felt like a massage. I stayed under the scalding water until my skin turned pink and the last traces of mud circled the drain. Then I stood there longer, letting the heat work into muscles that had been clenched for hours. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was somehow both impossibly soft and perfectly warm, I found my ruined wedding dress gone from where I'd left it on the floor. In its place was a simple note on the vanity. Burned it. W. The clothes in the closet fit well enough. Dark jeans, a black cashmere sweater, undergarments that were expensive and anonymous. I dressed quickly, braided my wet hair back from my face, and tried not to think about the fact that I was wearing clothes provided by a man who'd explicitly told me I was now his asset. When I came downstairs, Weston was seated at a massive dining table that I hadn't noticed the night before, papers spread across its surface in organized chaos. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing that the forest I'd glimpsed in the darkness was actually a carefully maintained private estate with manicured grounds stretching toward distant tree lines. Security cameras were visible at every corner. "Sit," Weston said without looking up from the document he was reviewing. "Eat." A plate was already set at the seat beside him. Eggs, toast, fruit, coffee. The food was still hot, as if it had been prepared moments ago, though I'd seen no staff. I sat and ate mechanically, my architectural training kicking in as I studied the papers spread across the table. They were blueprints, complex ones. Weston let me finish eating before he spoke. "Tell me what you see." "If people like Trent Pierce, who use and discard others like property, make your blood boil like they do mine, hit that subscribe button and join us. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's stand together against everyone who's ever made someone feel like they're just a commodity to be traded." I leaned forward, recognizing the format immediately. Commercial development, high-density mixed use, residential towers, retail ground floor, parking structure underneath. I traced the elevation drawings with one finger. Ambitious. The cantilever on the residential sections is aggressive. Beautiful, if it's engineered correctly. It's not. He slid another set of documents toward me. "These are the structural calculations submitted with the permit application. Find the problem." It was a test, obviously, but it was also the kind of problem I'd been trained to solve. I pulled the papers closer, scanning the load calculations, the foundation specs, the lateral force resistance systems. And there, buried in the third page of calculations, was the error. "The wind load calculations are wrong," I said, pointing to the specific formula. "Whoever engineered this used residential wind pressure coefficients instead of commercial. In a structure this height, in this city's wind zone, that's a catastrophic miscalculation." Weston's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Attention focused. "Explain." "The building will sway," I said, pulling a blank piece of paper from the stack and sketching quickly. Not enough to collapse immediately, but enough to cause progressive failure over time. Exterior cladding will crack. Windows will shatter. Occupants on the upper floors will experience motion sickness during high wind events. I circled the cantilever sections. "And these will oscillate. In 5 years, maybe 10, you'll have structural fatigue fractures in the connection points. The building won't fall, but it'll be condemned." "How do you fix it?" I grabbed another blueprint, overlaying my sketch. "Redesign the lateral system. Add a tuned mass damper at the top of the residential tower. Here. Increase the foundation depth by at least 3 meters to account for the additional load transfer. And recalculate everything using the correct wind coefficients." I met his eyes. "It'll add 6 months to your construction timeline and roughly $15 million to your budget. But it's the difference between a landmark and a lawsuit." Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. Weston leaned back in his chair, that calculating gaze locked on my face. "This is the Meridian Project. Trent Pierce's firm submitted these plans 8 weeks ago. The permits were approved last Tuesday. Ground breaks in 10 days. The implication hit me like a physical blow. He knows. Yes. He submitted fraudulent engineering calculations knowing the building would fail. My voice came out hollow. That's not just negligence. That's criminal. It's also profitable. Weston gathered the papers with efficient movements. Trent's construction company gets the initial contract. The building goes up. 5 years from now, when the problems start, he's long gone. The liability falls on the property management company, which is owned by a shell corporation that will conveniently declare bankruptcy. He tapped the blueprints. He walks away with $40 million in construction fees. The victims get nothing. You're going to stop him. No. Weston's smile was sharp. You are. He stood and walked to a cabinet built into the wall, retrieving a leather portfolio. When he returned, he dropped it on the table in front of me. This is the North Point development, my response to Trent's Meridian project. Same neighborhood, same target market, better location. He opened the portfolio, revealing preliminary sketches. I need a structural architect who can design something that makes Trent's building look like the death trap it is. Someone who can testify to city council about the engineering flaws in his permits. Someone who can redirect his investors toward a safer, smarter alternative. I stared at the sketches. They were good, visionary even, but incomplete. Raw concepts without the technical backbone to make them reality. You want me to design this? I want you to make this the most structurally perfect building in the city, Weston corrected. I want engineers reviewing your calculations and finding nothing but excellence. I want Trent Pierce's project buried under the weight of its own incompetence while my building rises in its place. From here on, the rules of the game changed. That's not protection, I said slowly. That's war. Yes, and you're my strategic weapon. He closed the portfolio and pushed it toward me. You have 72 hours to give me a preliminary structural design. Impress me, and you become my project architect with full creative control. Fail, and I'll find someone else, and you'll have to prove your value through other means. The threat was implicit, but clear. I was valuable as long as I was irreplaceable. I pulled the portfolio toward me, my mind already racing through load calculations and foundation systems. I'll need access to soil testing data, wind studies, and traffic impact analyses. Already compiled, in your bedroom, along with a laptop and direct access to my engineering database. Weston checked his watch. You start now. I stood, portfolio in hand, then hesitated. Why me? You could hire the best structural firm in the country. Why risk using someone with no reputation, no credentials outside a degree, because the best structural firm in the country would take 12 weeks and charge me $3 million, Weston interrupted. And because you just diagnosed a fatal flaw in Trent's building in under 3 minutes using nothing but visual analysis and spite. His dark eyes held mine. You're not merchandise, Anya. You're a weapon. And I'm very good at weaponizing talent. I should have been offended, horrified, afraid. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years, valued for something other than my appearance or my usefulness as a trophy. 72 hours, I said. 69 now, Weston corrected, already turning back to his own work. Don't waste time. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, the portfolio clutched to my chest like armor. When I reached the bedroom, I found he hadn't lied. A laptop sat on the desk, already logged into engineering databases I'd only dreamed of accessing as a student. Soil reports, wind studies, traffic analyses, even geological surveys going back 30 years. I sat down, opened the portfolio, and began to design. 72 hours to prove I was worth more than the price Trent had paid for me. 72 hours to design something so perfect it couldn't be ignored. 72 hours to show Weston Hayes that his investment in me wasn't just strategic. It was the best decision he'd ever make. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. I didn't sleep that first night, or the second. I worked with the kind of focused intensity that had gotten me through architecture school on a full scholarship, fueled by coffee and the cold understanding that failure meant irrelevance. When I finally descended the stairs 68 hours later, dark circles under my eyes and my hands stained with ink from hand-drawn detail sections, Weston was exactly where I'd left him, seated at the dining table, reviewing contracts. I dropped my portfolio in front of him without ceremony. It's done. He opened it without comment, and I watched his eyes track across my drawings. Structural sections, load calculations, foundation details, lateral system schematics. Every page was annotated, justified, defensible. 5 minutes passed in silence, then 10. Finally, Weston looked up. You added a rainwater harvesting system integrated into the structural columns. Dual-purpose infrastructure. The water load helps dampen lateral movement during wind events, and the harvested water feeds the irrigation for the green roof system. I pointed to the detail section. It's elegant and functional. It's brilliant. He closed the portfolio. You're hired. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for family. 3 weeks into my role as Weston's project architect, I realized I'd miscalculated what compliance would actually mean. I'd expected restrictions, confinement, the slow suffocation of being someone's controlled asset. Instead, I got creative freedom I'd never experienced in my life. The North Point development consumed both of us. Weston attended every design meeting, questioned every structural choice, challenged every aesthetic decision, not because he doubted me, but because he saw the same potential I did. The building stopped being just a commercial project. It became a statement, a challenge, a monument to the idea that perfection was achievable if you refused to compromise. We worked late into the nights, the dining table covered in blueprints and models, arguing about ceiling heights and column spacing with the intensity of people fighting over something that actually mattered. And slowly, carefully, I began to understand what made Weston Hayes so dangerous. It wasn't the violence. It wasn't the criminal empire. It was the absolute, uncompromising pursuit of excellence in everything he touched. The residential units need higher ceilings, I said one evening, 3 months into the design process. We were reviewing the upper floor plans, and the proportions felt wrong. Weston frowned. That's 4 additional inches per floor over 20 residential stories. You're talking about adding 6 feet of total building height. That changes the wind load calculations. I know. I've already recalculated. I slid the revised structural analysis toward him. The additional height actually improves the mass damper efficiency. And the increased ceiling height makes the units marketable at a 30% premium over comparable properties. He studied the numbers, and I watched the exact moment he saw it. The way the structural necessity became financial opportunity. You're thinking like a developer. I'm thinking like someone who wants this building to be flawless, I corrected. Structurally and financially. This choice would define the rest of his life. His eyes met mine across the table, and something shifted in the air between us. We'd been circling each other for months, 2 people locked in a partnership built on necessity and mutual respect, neither willing to acknowledge that it had become something more. I have a proposition, Weston said, setting down the plans. A different project, larger scale, long-term commitment. I straightened, instincts prickling. I'm listening. He stood and walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, backlit by the city lights beyond. I'm building a resort. 50 acres, coastal property, high-end clientele, complete privacy, world-class amenities. He turned to face me. I need an architect who can design it as a fortress disguised as paradise. A fortress. My organization has enemies. I have enemies. The people who'll stay at this resort will be high-value targets who need security without feeling imprisoned. He pulled up images on his phone and handed it to me. The location, the property survey. Initial concept sketches. I scrolled through the images, my architectural mind immediately cataloging possibilities. The property was stunning. Clifftop views, private beach access, natural barriers on 3 sides. And the security requirements would be extraordinary. You want something that looks like luxury but functions like a defensive position, I said slowly. I want something that makes guests feel like royalty while making it impossible for anyone unauthorized to get within a mile of them. Weston's expression was intense. I want you to design the kind of structure that's never been built, where every aesthetic choice serves a strategic purpose, where beauty is the camouflage for impermeability. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a project. It was the kind of challenge architects spent their entire careers dreaming about. Timeline? 2 years for design and approvals, 3 years for construction. You'd be the lead structural architect and project designer, full creative control within the security parameters. He paused. And you'd need to be on site. The property is remote. You'd live there during the design phase. With you. Yes. The implication hung between us, unspoken but undeniable. 2 years in close quarters, working on a project that would require absolute trust and collaboration. The professional partnership we'd built would be tested in ways neither of us could predict. He didn't want revenge. He needed it. What's the budget? I asked, because numbers were safer than acknowledging the weight of what he was offering. Unlimited. I want perfection. Cost is irrelevant. I looked at the images again. At the raw potential of the site. At the opportunity to design something that would define my career. If I was brave enough to commit to years in Weston Hayes' orbit. I'll need to see the property in person before I agree, I said. Understand the topography, the wind patterns, the geological constraints. We leave tomorrow morning. He took his phone back. I'll have my team prepare the helicopter. Helicopter? His smile was sharp. Did you think I'd let you ride in a car for 6 hours when I own faster options? The next morning, I found myself strapped into a luxury helicopter, flying over coastlines so beautiful it looked like a postcard. Weston sat across from me, reviewing documents on a tablet. Perfectly at ease in a machine that was currently several thousand feet in the air and held aloft by physics I didn't entirely trust. When we landed, the full scope of the property revealed itself. 50 acres of pristine wilderness, clifftop views that stretched to the horizon, and absolute privacy. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The nearest town was 15. Weston led me across the property, pointing out boundary markers and natural defensive positions with the ease of someone who'd already memorized every inch. The main resort building here, he said, standing at the highest point of the cliff. Guest villas scattered along this ridge. Staff quarters and operational buildings further inland, hidden from view. And here, he gestured to a natural cove below. Private marina access. I turned slowly, cataloging everything. The wind patterns, the sightlines, the way the terrain created natural barriers. And then I saw it, the perfect design solution. What she found in the envelope froze her in place. Not one building, I said. A compound. Multiple structures connected by underground passages. The main resort sits on the cliff edge. Maximum views, maximum presence. But the real security infrastructure is hidden below ground. Reinforced tunnels, safe rooms, supply storage. Everything a guest sees is luxury and light. Everything they don't see is steel and stone. Weston's expression shifted into something I'd never seen before. Pure, unfiltered approval. "Show me," he said. I grabbed a stick and began sketching in the dirt. Rough outlines, spatial relationships, structural concepts. And as I drew, Weston knelt beside me, asking questions, challenging assumptions, pushing me toward better solutions. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. And when I finally stood, covered in dirt and buzzing with creative energy, I found Weston watching me with an intensity that had nothing to do with architecture. "Yes," I said before he could ask. "I'll do it. I'll design your fortress." "Our fortress," he corrected. "This is a partnership, Anya. Your vision, my resources, equal stakes." "Equal stakes," I repeated, testing the words. "Does that mean equal say in decisions?" "It means I trust your expertise enough to let you prove me wrong." He extended his hand. Deal? I looked at his hand, the same hand I'd shaken months ago when I'd chosen survival over pride. But this time, I wasn't shaking it out of desperation. I was shaking it because I wanted to, Deal, I said. And when our hands clasped, I felt something more than agreement. I felt like an equal. But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. 6 months into the resort design, I'd almost convinced myself that Trent Pierce had accepted his loss. That he'd moved on to other projects, other acquisitions, other women to parade as trophies. That the careful security measures Weston maintained around me were excessive precautions rather than necessary defenses. I should have known better. The attack came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the construction site for the North Point development, the building that had started all of this, reviewing foundation work with the engineering team. Weston was in the city for meetings, and I'd insisted I didn't need security for a routine site inspection. My first mistake. I was examining a questionable concrete pour when I heard the footsteps behind me. Too many, too fast, wrong rhythm for construction workers. I turned and found 3 men in expensive suits blocking the exit from the foundation pit. And behind them, descending the temporary stairs with casual arrogance, was Trent Pierce. He looked exactly as I remembered. Handsome in a calculated way, with perfect hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of man who looked like a romantic lead in movies and a monster in private. He trusted her. And that was his biggest mistake. Anya. My name in his mouth sounded like ownership. You've been difficult to locate. The construction crew had vanished, paid off or threatened, I'd guess, later. We were alone in the foundation pit, surrounded by concrete and rebar and escape routes that were all blocked by his men. Trent. I kept my voice level, my posture loose. Panic would only feed him. You're trespassing on private property. I'm reclaiming stolen property, he corrected, moving closer. You left our wedding in quite a state. Embarrassed me in front of 300 guests. Cost me a considerable amount of social capital. Send me a bill. His smile sharpened. I intend to. With interest. He gestured to his men. Take her. Gently. I don't want her damaged before the ceremony. They moved in fast. Professionals, not thugs. One grabbed my left arm, another my right, and I was about to be dragged toward the stairs when a voice cut through the foundation pit like a blade. Remove your hands from her, now. And then, the gun clicked. Weston stood at the top of the stairs, flanked by 4 men I recognized from his security detail. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The absolute authority in his voice stopped Trent's men mid-motion. Hayes. Trent's tone was conversational, but tension radiated from his shoulders. This is a private matter between me and my fiancée. She's not your fiancée. Weston descended the stairs with measured steps, each footfall deliberate. She never was. The wedding didn't happen. The contract was voided. You have no legal claim. I have every claim. Her guardian signed the marriage agreement. Her guardian signed under duress and financial coercion, which invalidates the contract under state law. Weston reached the bottom of the stairs and moved toward us with predatory calm. More importantly, she's currently employed by me as the lead structural architect on a $50 million development. Any attempt to interfere with her work constitutes tortious interference with a business contract. Trent's men still held my arms, but their grips had loosened. They were watching Weston's security detail, calculating odds that were rapidly turning against them. Are you Team Anya and Weston? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This story is just getting started. This is about more than business, Trent said, his mask slipping to reveal the fury beneath. She humiliated me. She owes me. She owes you nothing. Weston's voice went colder. But you owe me an explanation for why you're on my construction site threatening my employee. Your employee. Trent laughed, sharp and bitter. Is that what you're calling her? Everyone knows what Anya Thorne really is. A bought woman who traded one owner for another. The slur hit exactly as he'd intended, designed to reduce me to nothing more than a commodity. But before I could respond, Weston moved. Someone in the room was lying. But who? It happened so fast I almost missed it. One moment he was standing 3 feet away. The next he had Trent by the throat, slammed against the concrete foundation wall with enough force to crack the temporary supports. Say that again, Weston said softly, his hand tight around Trent's windpipe. I'd like to hear you repeat it. Trent's face was turning red, his hands clawing at Weston's grip. His men moved forward, but Weston's security detail was faster. Weapons drawn, positions taken. A clear message that any escalation would end badly for everyone involved. She is my architect, Weston continued, his voice never rising above conversational. She designed the building you're standing in. She solved structural problems your entire engineering department couldn't identify. She's worth more to me professionally than you'll ever be worth in your entire mediocre career. He released Trent, who stumbled forward, gasping. But Weston wasn't done. Here's what's going to happen, he said, addressing the entire foundation pit. Anya Thorne is under the protection of the Hayes organization. Any further contact with her, direct, indirect, or through intermediaries, will be considered a hostile action against my interests. He looked at Trent directly, and I respond to hostile actions with overwhelming force. You can't threaten me. That wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Weston pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped something, then showed Trent the screen. These are the construction permits for your Meridian project. As of 10 minutes ago, they've been flagged for secondary review by the City Engineering Department. They'll find the structural deficiencies, they'll revoke your permits, and they'll launch an investigation into professional negligence. He realized he wasn't alone. Someone else had arrived. Trent's expression went from fury to panic. You can't. I already did. The review starts tomorrow morning. Weston pocketed his phone. You have 2 choices. Walk away from Anya permanently, and maybe I'll consider allowing your project to proceed after you've corrected the engineering failures. Or continue this antagonistic behavior, and I'll personally ensure every permit you've ever filed gets reviewed for fraud. It was a beautiful, brutal strategy. Weston wasn't just defending me. He was dismantling Trent's entire business foundation. Trent looked at me, and I saw it. The moment he realized I was no longer his to claim. That I'd become something more valuable than a trophy. That he'd lost not just a bride, but a strategic asset he'd never properly valued. This isn't over, Trent said, but the words were hollow. Yes, Weston replied. It is. He gestured to his security. Escort Mr. Pierce and his associates off the property. If they return, call the police and have them arrested for trespassing. Trent's men released my arms and backed away. Trent himself straightened his suit jacket, attempting to salvage dignity from defeat. But as he passed me on his way to the stairs, he leaned close enough to whisper, You think you've won, but you've just traded one cage for another. The difference, I said quietly, is that this cage values what I can build. He flinched. Actually flinched. And I realized I'd struck deeper than any physical blow could have reached. Then he was gone, his men following, and I was alone in the foundation pit with Weston and his security detail. Are you hurt? Weston asked, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Concern. Real, unfiltered concern. I'm fine. I'm fine. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because we have a problem. The permits? No, those are a real issue now that I've filed the complaint. But the problem is that Trent found you here, which means there's a leak in either my organization or the construction crew. His expression went cold. And I don't tolerate leaks. His right-hand man had been hiding something from him. 2 days later, I learned that 3 members of the construction crew had been paid by Trent to provide information about my schedule. They were fired. Quietly. Permanently. And Weston implemented new security protocols that meant I was never alone on any job site ever again. But more importantly, something had shifted between us. The professional respect was still there. The collaborative partnership was still intact. But now, there was something else. Something that had been building for months and had crystallized in the moment Weston had put his hand around Trent's throat and declared me valuable. Protection had become possession, and I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about that. Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. The resort design consumed us in ways the North Point development never had. We spent 3 weeks on site at the coastal property, living in a temporary structure while I finalized the architectural plans, and Weston coordinated the security infrastructure. Proximity forced intimacy, shared meals, late-night design sessions, mornings where I'd find him already awake at dawn, reviewing contracts while I sketched elevation studies in the half-light. We were careful, professional. We maintained the boundaries of our arrangement with deliberate precision, until the night those boundaries shattered. It was late, nearly 2 in the morning. I'd been working on the underground tunnel system, trying to solve a ventilation problem that had been plaguing me for days. The solution finally clicked, and I'd rushed downstairs to show Weston, forgetting that normal people slept at reasonable hours. I found him in the temporary office space, shirtless, a towel around his neck, clearly just back from a workout in the makeshift gym he'd set up. The tattoos I'd glimpsed before covered more of him than I'd realized, geometric patterns that flowed across his shoulders and chest like deliberate armor, wrapping around his ribs and disappearing beneath the waistband of his workout pants. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression shifted when he saw me. Hair loose, barefoot, wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt and sleep shorts because I'd forgotten to put on actual clothes before running downstairs. "I solved it," I said, holding up my sketches. "The ventilation problem. If we integrate the air circulation system with the geothermal heating infrastructure, we can—" I stopped, because Weston was staring at me with an intensity that had nothing to do with architectural innovation. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked quietly. "Late. I know, but this couldn't wait. Anya." He stood, and suddenly the room felt smaller. "Do you have any idea how difficult you've made this?" I blinked. "The ventilation system?" "No. This." He gestured between us. "The professional distance. The careful boundaries. The pretense that we're nothing more than business partners." He moved closer, and I could smell sweat and clean skin and something uniquely him. "I've spent 6 months watching you design buildings like you're composing symphonies. Listening to you argue structural theory with the passion most people reserve for religion. Seeing you become exactly what I knew you could be. Brilliant, fearless, absolutely irreplaceable." My breath caught. Weston. Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. "I told you that you were an asset," he continued, each word deliberate. "That your value to me was strategic, professional. But that was a lie we both needed to believe." He stopped inches from me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "You stopped being an asset the moment you looked at that North Point property and saw the same vision I did. You became something far more dangerous." "What?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "A partner. An equal. Someone I trust with my vision and my vulnerabilities." His hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my jaw with surprising gentleness. "Someone I want in ways that have nothing to do with business strategy." I should have stepped back, should have reminded him of the power imbalance, the transactional foundation of our arrangement, all the rational reasons why this was a catastrophically bad idea. Instead, I leaned into his touch. This complicates everything. Yes. Changes the dynamic we've built. Yes. Probably violates several of your non-negotiable rules about emotional involvement with assets. His thumb traced my lower lip. I'm willing to renegotiate the terms. On what basis? My voice was shaking now, and not from fear. On the basis that I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. And I think... He paused, his dark eyes searching mine. I think you feel the same way. I did. God help me, I did. Somewhere between the architectural debates and the shared vision and the way he'd defended me against Trent, necessity had become desire. Professional respect had become something consuming and complicated and absolutely impossible to deny. For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. If we do this, I said carefully, the power dynamic shifts. I need to know that my value doesn't become contingent on whether you're in my bed. He finished the thought. Anya, your value to me was never contingent on anything except your mind and your skill. Sex doesn't change that. Romance doesn't change that. The only thing that would change it is if you stopped being extraordinary, and that's biologically impossible. You're sure? I'm never unsure. He leaned down, his mouth hovering just above mine. But I need to hear you say it. I need explicit consent, not compliance driven by our arrangement. I want this, I said, and realized I'd never meant anything more. I want you, not because you're protecting me, not because you gave me opportunity, but because you see me as an equal, and you push me to be better, and you defend what I build like it matters. He kissed me before I could finish, and it was nothing like I'd expected. Not brutal, not demanding. It was controlled and intense and absolutely overwhelming. His hands slid into my hair, tilting my head to deepen the kiss, and I grabbed his shoulders, feeling the heat of his skin, the hard muscle beneath, and kissed him back with 6 months of denied want. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. This changes things. I know. I don't share. I don't do casual. If we cross this line, you're mine in every sense that matters. There was the possessiveness I'd expected, but instead of feeling trapped, I felt claimed in a way that was somehow liberating. Then you're mine too, I said. Equal stakes, remember? His smile was sharp. Equal stakes. He kissed me again, and this time there was nothing careful about it. This was hunger and possession and months of tension finally released. His hands slid down my sides, pulling me against him, and I could feel the evidence of exactly how much he wanted this. Wanted me. Bedroom, he said against my mouth. Now. Which one? Don't care. Closest. We made it halfway up the stairs before I pushed him against the wall and kissed him with enough force that he actually groaned. His hands found the hem of my shirt, sliding underneath, and the feel of his calloused palms against my skin made rational thought impossible. We ended up in my bedroom because it was closer. The bed was still covered in architectural sketches and fabric samples, and Weston swept them all onto the floor with zero regard for my organizational system before pulling me down onto the mattress. Tell me if I'm moving too fast, he said, hovering over me, his weight supported on his forearms. You're moving too slow, I replied, and pulled him down. What followed was incendiary. He took his time, mapping every inch of my skin, learning what made me gasp and what made me beg, absolutely dismantling my control with methodical precision. And when he finally pushed inside me, the connection was so intense I actually lost my breath. Look at me, he commanded, and I opened my eyes to find him watching my face with absolute focus. I want to see you. So I let him see me, vulnerable and wanting and completely his. And when I finally shattered, his name on my lips, he followed moments later with my name on his. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the wreckage of my bed, both of us breathing hard, covered in sweat. That was, I started. Overdue, he finished. And we're doing it again, immediately after I confirm you're okay. I laughed, something loose and genuine that surprised us both. I'm better than okay. Good. He pulled me against his chest, and I felt his heartbeat gradually slow beneath my palm. Because I meant what I said. You're mine now. In every way. Possessive. Always. He pressed a kiss to my temple. But you knew that about me. I did. I'd known it from the moment he'd slammed Trent against that concrete wall. The difference was that now, his possession felt like partnership. Equal stakes, I reminded him. Equal stakes, he agreed. And then, quieter. Build with me, Anya. Not just the resort. Everything. I understood what he was offering. Not just a project. Not just protection. A future. A foundation. Okay, I said. Let's build everything. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. 3 months after that first night, our relationship had settled into something that looked almost domestic. We worked together during the day, refining the resort design, overseeing construction on the North Point development, managing the systematic dismantling of Trent's business ventures. At night, we fell into bed together with the same intensity we brought to architecture, neither of us capable of half measures in anything we did. But domesticity came with complications. The issue revealed itself during a meeting with Weston's business associates, men who ran various legitimate and less legitimate enterprises under the Hayes organization umbrella. I'd been invited to present the resort design, to explain the structural innovations and security features that made the project viable. I'd prepared for weeks, created a presentation that was visually stunning and technically flawless, rehearsed my delivery until I could discuss load-bearing calculations and defensive sightlines without notes. And then, 5 minutes into my presentation, one of Weston's associates interrupted. "This is very pretty," Marcus Chen said, his tone dismissive. "But let's be honest, we're here to discuss business, not play architect. Weston, what's the actual security assessment?" I stopped mid-sentence. Presentation remote still in my hand. Weston, seated at the head of the conference table, didn't immediately respond. And in that silence, I saw the dynamic that had been building for months. I wasn't being introduced as the lead architect. I was being tolerated as Weston's... what? Girlfriend? Kept woman? The pretty accessory who played with blueprints while the men discussed real business. What she said next shattered his trust instantly. "The security assessment is built into the architectural design," I said, keeping my voice level. "Every structural choice serves a defensive purpose. The column spacing creates natural choke points. The sightlines from the main building cover all approach angles. The underground tunnel system provides secure evacuation routes that can't be compromised from outside the property." "That's fascinating," another associate said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "But what Weston's asking is whether the building can actually withstand a coordinated assault." "Yes," I said flatly. "It can. Because I designed it to function as a fortress. That was the brief. That's what I delivered." Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "With all due respect, Miss Thorne, architectural theory and practical security are very different disciplines." "Don't." Weston's voice cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward him. "Don't dismiss her expertise. Don't question her qualifications. And don't ever interrupt her presentation again." The room went silent. Marcus's expression tightened. But he nodded. "Anya is the lead architect on this project," Weston continued, his tone absolutely final. She has full authority over all structural and design decisions. If you have questions about security, you address them to her. If you have concerns about feasibility, you bring them to her. She answers to me, and I've approved every aspect of her design. It should have felt like vindication, like Weston defending my professional credibility. Instead, it felt like being a child whose parent had to intervene on the playground. I finished the presentation on autopilot, answered the remaining questions with professional precision, and waited until the meeting ended before I excused myself and walked out. Weston found me 20 minutes later on the rooftop terrace of his downtown building, staring at the city lights and trying to process the cold fury building in my chest. "You left the meeting," he said, not quite a question. I completed the presentation. The meeting was effectively over. "Anya." He moved closer, and I heard the concern in his voice. Marcus was out of line. I handled it. But he had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. "You defended me." I turned to face him. Like I was something that needed defending, like I couldn't handle the situation myself. His expression shifted to confusion. "He was disrespecting you." And I was addressing it. I was asserting my expertise. I was doing exactly what I needed to do to establish credibility. My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. And then you intervened. You made it about your authority instead of my competence. I was supporting you. No, you were protecting me. Again. I stepped closer, anger and frustration finally boiling over. "I'm not your asset anymore, Weston. I'm not your employee. You said we were partners, equal stakes. But the moment someone challenges me, you step in and make it about your power instead of letting me prove my own." He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, "You think I undermined you." "I think you meant to help. But yes, you undermined me." I crossed my arms. I've spent my entire life being treated like something that needed to be managed or protected or controlled. I escaped Trent because he saw me as property. I came to you because you offered safety. But I stayed because you gave me opportunity and respected my skills. My voice cracked slightly. Don't take that away from me by turning me into something you protect instead of someone you trust. Weston's jaw tightened, and I saw him working through the implications. He was used to control, used to being the absolute authority in every room. Having someone, even me, challenge that authority was foreign territory. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want equality, real equality. Not you defending me to your associates. Me defending myself and you backing my authority without having to assert yours." I held his gaze. "I want to walk into a room and have people respect me because of what I've built, not because I'm yours. You're asking me to let you fight your own battles. I'm demanding it. As your equal partner." I moved closer. "I love you. I think I've loved you since you put Trent against that wall and called me valuable. But I won't be loved as a trophy. I won't be protected into irrelevance. If this is going to work, if we're going to build something real, I need you to trust that I'm strong enough to stand on my own." The word love hung between us. I hadn't meant to say it, hadn't planned this confrontation to become a declaration. But there it was, raw and honest and absolutely terrifying. He had no idea the night would end in blood. Weston was silent for 5 long seconds. Then he closed the distance between us and cupped my face in his hands. "You're right." I blinked. "What?" "You're right. I did undermine you. I made it about my authority instead of your competence." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "And you're right that I have a problem letting you fight your own battles. I'm used to protecting what's mine. It's instinct. I'm not something to be protected. No, you're someone to be respected, someone to stand beside, not in front of." He leaned down, resting his forehead against mine. "I love you too. And part of loving you means trusting you to be as strong as I already know you are. My breath caught. You love me. Of course I do. How could I not? You redesigned my entire vision for the resort and made it better. You solve problems I didn't know existed. You challenge me every single day to be worthy of your partnership. His hands slid down to my shoulders. But you're right. I've been treating you like an asset I need to protect instead of a partner I need to trust. So what changes? Everything. He stepped back, and his expression shifted into something more formal. Effective immediately, you're no longer just the lead architect. You're a named partner in the resort development. Your name goes on all the contracts. Your authority is absolute within the scope of the project. And when we present to investors or associates, you lead, not me. I stared at him. You're serious? Completely. Equal stakes means equal authority. He pulled out his phone, typed something, then showed me the screen. I'm drafting the partnership agreement now. 50-50 ownership. Joint decision-making authority. You're not my employee. You're my partner in every legal and practical sense. Weston. And one more thing. He pocketed the phone and took my hands. The next time someone questions your expertise, I'll let you handle it. I'll back your decisions. But I won't fight your battles for you unless you explicitly ask me to. It was everything I'd demanded. Everything I'd needed. He was relinquishing control. Something I knew cost him dearly. Because I'd asked for it. Thank you, I said quietly. Don't thank me for treating you the way you deserve to be treated. He pulled me close. Build with me, Anya. As an equal. As a partner. As someone I love and trust completely. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the solid strength of his body and the steady beat of his heart. Equal stakes. Equal stakes, he agreed. And then, with a hint of his usual commanding tone, now come back downstairs and correct Marcus's structural misconceptions. I want to watch you make him regret ever questioning you. I laughed despite myself. You're going to enjoy this, aren't you? Immensely. You're terrifying when you're professionally offended. We went back downstairs together, and when I walked into that conference room, I walked in as Weston Hayes' equal partner, named, respected, and absolutely in control of my own authority. Marcus Chen learned more about load-bearing calculations than he'd ever wanted to know, and Weston stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, smiling like a man watching his partner demolish obstacles with pure competence. It was the moment I realized we'd finally built something real. Not protection, not necessity, partnership, in every sense that mattered. Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. 2 years later, the resort opened. The Hayes Thorn Coastal Retreat. Both our names on the deed. Both our visions realized in glass and steel and strategic defensive architecture disguised as luxury. The opening gala was everything we'd planned. High-end guests, flawless execution, and security so seamless that no one noticed the cameras hidden in the landscaping, or the reinforced safe rooms integrated into every guest villa's foundation. I stood on the main terrace in a black dress that Weston had chosen specifically because it made me look powerful and untouchable. My hair was up, my presentation notes were memorized, and I was about to address 300 investors, developers, and journalists about the architectural achievement we'd built. Weston found me 5 minutes before we were scheduled to begin. He was in a tailored suit that made him look like exactly what he was. A man who'd built an empire on strategy and absolute control. The tattoos were hidden beneath fabric, the criminal reputation buried beneath legitimacy, but I could still see the predator beneath the polish. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, I admitted. What if they hate it? They won't. It's perfect. He adjusted my necklace, a simple diamond pendant he'd given me 6 months ago when we'd finalized the partnership contracts. You made it perfect. We made it perfect. Yes, but tonight is yours. You designed this. You solved every impossible problem. You turned my vague security requirements into something extraordinary. He tilted my chin up. So you're going to walk out there, present our achievement, and accept the recognition you've earned. Our achievement. Anya. His voice went softer. Let yourself have this. Let yourself be brilliant without deflecting to partnership. You've spent 2 years proving you're my equal. Tonight, prove you're exceptional all on your own. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I kissed him quickly, then stepped back. How do I look? Like the most dangerous woman in the room. He smiled. Which you are. The presentation went flawlessly. I walked the assembled guests through the architectural vision, the structural innovations, the way every aesthetic choice served a strategic purpose. I highlighted the sustainable systems, the defensive infrastructure, the integration of luxury and security. And when I finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. But the moment that mattered came afterward, when Weston took the stage for closing remarks. He should have walked away, but then he saw it. The Hayes Thorn Coastal Retreat represents a vision that began 3 years ago, he said, his voice carrying easily across the terrace. I wanted to build something that had never existed, a fortress disguised as paradise, a place where security and luxury weren't competing priorities but integrated design elements. He paused and his eyes found mine in the crowd. I brought that vision to Anya Thorne, expecting a competent architect who could execute my specifications. What I found was a partner who took my vision and made it better, who challenged every assumption, who solved problems I didn't know existed, who designed something so structurally perfect that it redefined what's possible in defensive architecture. The crowd was listening with rapt attention, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. This resort exists because of her vision, Weston continued. Her expertise, her refusal to compromise on excellence. And while my name is on the deed, make no mistake, this is Anya's achievement, her masterpiece. He gestured to the wall behind him, where a bronze plaque was mounted. I'd seen it during installation, but hadn't looked closely at the final inscription. The Hayes Thorn Coastal Retreat. Structural designer and lead architect, Anya Thorne. Developer and security consultant, Weston Hayes. Built on vision, precision, and the refusal to accept impossible. My name. First, my title, primary. I looked at Weston, and he was smiling, not the sharp, predatory smile I'd first seen in his limousine, but something genuine and warm and absolutely certain. Anya Thorne is not just my business partner, he said, and the crowd went very quiet. She's my wife. The announcement rippled through the guests like electricity. I stared at him, heart pounding, because we hadn't discussed making the marriage public. We'd been quietly married for 3 months, a private ceremony, a legal contract, a partnership made formal and binding. But we'd agreed to keep it private until after the resort opened. Apparently, Weston had changed his mind. We married 3 months ago, he continued, addressing the crowd but looking at me. And I'm telling you now because I want everyone to understand something. Anya Thorne didn't become exceptional by marrying me. She was extraordinary long before I ever met her. This building is proof of that. Her name on the deed is proof of that. And anyone who thinks her achievement is diminished by our marriage fundamentally misunderstands who she is. He descended from the stage and crossed to where I stood, extending his hand. Come here. I moved through the crowd on autopilot, my hand finding his, and he pulled me up onto the stage beside him. This is our achievement, he said, addressing the guests. Built together, as equals, as partners in every sense that matters. He looked at me. And I've never been more proud of anything in my life. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and I stood there, hand in Weston's, looking out at the resort we'd built, the fortress disguised as paradise, the structural impossibility made real, the shared vision realized in stone and steel. You told them, I said quietly, under the cover of applause. I told them you're mine and I'm yours, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with the bronze plaque. He squeezed my hand. Was I wrong? No. I looked at the resort, at the name etched in bronze, at the future we'd built together. You were perfect. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the staff had cleared the terrace, Weston and I stood alone on the clifftop balcony. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, and the resort lights illuminated the structure we'd created. Do you remember the first night? Weston asked, his arm around my waist. When you hid in my limousine covered in mud in desperation? I thought you were going to kill me. I thought you were an inconvenient problem. He pulled me closer. I was catastrophically wrong. About killing me? About the inconvenient part. You've been the most convenient thing that ever happened to me. Convenient in the sense that you solved every problem I threw at you, made every vision better, turned every challenge into opportunity. I leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. We built something good. We built something perfect. He turned me to face him. You know what the bronze plaque doesn't say? What? That you saved me. His hands cupped my face gently. I was building an empire, accumulating power and wealth and control, but I wasn't building anything that mattered. And then you showed up in my car, covered in mud, offering me intelligence on Trent Pierce. And you gave me something I didn't know I needed. What? A reason to build something beautiful. He kissed my forehead. This resort isn't just security infrastructure and luxury amenities. It's proof that power can be used to create instead of destroy. And I only learned that because you demanded I see you as an equal. My throat tightened. I love you. I love you too. My wife. My partner. My equal. He smiled. The architect of everything that matters. We stood there as the ocean crashed and the resort lights glowed and the future stretched before us like an unbuilt structure waiting for vision and precision and the refusal to accept impossible. We'd built our fortress. Now we'd defend it together. This didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. 6 months after the resort opened, I woke up in our private villa, the one we'd designed as our personal residence within the resort complex, to find Weston already awake, working on his laptop in bed. It's 6 a.m, I mumbled, rolling over to press against his side. We agreed on no work before 7. This isn't work, it's reconnaissance. He showed me the screen. Marcus sent this. It was a news article. The headline read, Trent Pierce Development Corporation files for bankruptcy following engineering scandal. I sat up, suddenly very awake. They found it. All of it. The falsified permits, the structural deficiencies, the fraud. Weston scrolled through the article. Meridian Project was condemned last month. 3 other developments are under investigation. His entire empire is collapsing. Good, I said, and meant it. Trent had built his business on exploitation and negligence. Watching it crumble was deeply satisfying. There's more. Weston pulled up another article. He's being sued by investors for fraud and by the city for permit violations. Civil and criminal charges. He's looking at prison time. I studied the photo of Trent being escorted from a courthouse, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. He looked diminished. Small. Exactly as he'd looked in the foundation pit when Weston had slammed him against the concrete. I should feel bad for him, I said. But you don't. Not even a little bit. I looked at Weston. Does that make me a bad person? It makes you someone who survived him and built something better. He closed the laptop. Trent Pierce tried to own you. He failed. And now he's paying the consequences of a lifetime of treating people as disposable assets. While I'm here, in a resort I designed, with a man who sees me as an equal. Yes. He pulled me closer. You won. Completely. Definitively. And he lost everything. It should have felt like vindication. Like justice. And it did. But it also felt like closure. The final severing of a connection I'd been running from for years. What do you want to do today? Weston asked, changing the subject with practiced ease. I thought about it. We had no meetings scheduled, no deadlines, no presentations. The resort was running flawlessly under the management team we'd hired. For the first time in 3 years, we had nothing urgent demanding our attention. I want to design something new, I said. Something completely impractical and beautiful. Something that serves no strategic purpose except to be extraordinary. Weston smiled. What did you have in mind? A folly. An architectural folly. Right there. I pointed to a section of the property we'd left undeveloped, a clifftop outcropping with impossible views. Something that exists purely because we can build it. No security requirements, no defensive purpose, just structure and beauty, and the challenge of making something perfect in a place that shouldn't support any building at all. That's extremely impractical. I know, that's the point. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, let's design an impractical folly. What's your vision? We spent the morning sketching, not in SAD software or with professional tools. Just pencils and paper, rough concepts and wild ideas, freed from the constraints of budget or timeline or strategic necessity. It was pure creative joy, the kind of architectural exploration I dreamed about in school before survival became the only priority. Glass and steel, I said, sketching a cantilevered structure that defied gravity. Minimal footprint, maximum transparency, something that looks like it's floating over the cliff edge. Structurally impossible, Weston pointed out. Structurally challenging, I corrected. There's a difference. You want to build an impossible structure just to prove you can. Exactly. I grinned at him. Are you telling me you don't want to see if we can do it? His expression shifted into something predatory and approving. When do we start? We started that afternoon. Called in structural engineers, commissioned geological surveys, began the process of turning impossible into reality. And as we worked, I realized this was what we'd built together. Not just a resort, or a business partnership, but the freedom to create for the pure joy of creation. But the real question was, who planned it? 3 months later, the folly was complete. A structure of glass and steel that seemed to float over the cliff edge, held aloft by engineering precision and the refusal to accept impossible. It served no purpose except to be beautiful, to exist as proof that we could build it. We stood inside it on the opening day, just the two of us, no guests, no journalists, no one to impress except each other. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, and the glass walls made it feel like we were suspended in space. This is my favorite thing we've built, I said quietly. Better than the resort? Different from the resort. The resort is about purpose and precision, and making the impossible functional. This is about joy. I turned to face him. We built this because we could, because we wanted to, because we have the freedom to create something impractical and beautiful just for the sake of it. Weston pulled a small box from his pocket. Speaking of impractical and beautiful, I stared at the box. We're already married. I know, but when I married you, it was practical, strategic, a partnership formalized. He opened the box, revealing a ring, not a simple diamond, but an architectural marvel in miniature. Custom-designed geometric patterns in platinum and diamonds that echoed the structural elements of the folly. This is impractical. This is me giving you something beautiful because I love you, because you make me want to build impossible things, because you're the architect of everything that matters in my life. My vision blurred. Weston, I know you have a wedding ring. I know we have contracts and legal documents and partnership agreements, but I wanted to give you this. A symbol of everything we've built together that has nothing to do with strategy or survival. This is about love. Pure, impractical, absolutely certain love. He took my hand and slid the ring onto my finger beside the simple band I already wore. It fit perfectly, because of course he'd measured, planned, designed something custom specifically for me. It's perfect, I whispered. You're perfect. He pulled me close. My wife, my partner, my equal. The woman who hid in my limousine covered in mud and terror and somehow became the most important person in my life. I kissed him, and it tasted like ocean salt and future, and the absolute certainty that we'd built something that would last. We're the architects of our own destiny, I said against his mouth, echoing the inscription on the resort plaque. Yes, but more than that, we're the architects of each other's happiness. His hands slid into my hair. You design the structures. I provide the foundation. And together, we build something extraordinary. Equal stakes. Always. We stood there in our impossible folly, suspended above the ocean, wrapped in glass and steel and the future we'd built together. From runaway bride to structural architect, from mafia boss to legitimate developer, from transaction to partnership to love. I'd hidden in Weston Hayes' limousine to escape one cage. I'd found him hours later and discovered freedom. Not freedom from control, but freedom to build, to create, to be valued for my mind and my skills, and my absolute refusal to settle for anything less than perfection. Trent Pierce had tried to own me. Weston Hayes had made me his equal, and together we'd built an empire based not on fear or possession, but on mutual respect and shared vision and the understanding that true partnership meant giving each other room to be extraordinary. What should we design next? I asked, already thinking about the empty acres of property still undeveloped. Weston smiled, that sharp, predatory smile I'd first seen in the darkened limousine, now softened by love and trust and years of partnership. Anything you want. We have the rest of our lives to make impossible things real. Then let's start now. We left the folly hand in hand, two architects walking toward the future we'd designed together. Equal partners. Equal stakes. Equally committed to building something extraordinary. The orphan who'd been sold as a bargaining chip had become the structural architect who designed fortresses. The mafia boss who'd built an empire on control had learned to share power with his equal. And together, we were the architects of our own destiny, building impossible things, solving unsolvable problems, and proving that sometimes the best foundations are built on necessity, transformed by respect, and cemented by love. If this story touched your heart, please share in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Your support keeps these stories alive.